In a distant childhood, her father had promised his daughter, whom he called his favorite apple pie, to make her the first lady of the country. But now she, Reinhardt Rink, growing up on the estate of the Marquis of Rinke, sat over a coffin. The coffin of her father who had passed away 15 years ago. Before the girl realized what was going on, a painfully familiar voice sounded behind her. The Crown Prince, Michel Alankis, towered over her and was displeased with his wife's behavior, a wife with whom he was going to dissolve his marriage very soon, stripping her of her status as Crown Princess. Reinhardt knew what he was about to say. Michelle wanted a divorce, and in response, the girl herself would be outraged. Should the Crown Prince speak such words before the coffin of her father, who died in his place because of the order? The father, the Marquis of Rink, kept his word then. He had given his daughter the most important title in the Alankis Empire through a marriage of convenience. Thanks to him, after an engagement at the age of 12, Reinhardt became a crown princess and called the wife of Michel Alanks. Of course, as is usually the case in marriages of convenience, between her and her husband there were no feelings. And the crown prince quickly found himself a mistress, Dulcinea Canaria, princess of the Principality of Canaria, taken hostage. She had the nerve to whisper orders favorable to the crown prince, such as stopping the importation of Sarawak desert salt in favor of the girl's home principality, and Michelle was letting her do it. The crown prince, firmly in love with Dulcinea, began an absurd tyranny and reaped the fruits of his deeds. Sarawak, dissatisfied with the monopoly contract, mutinied. His Majesty the Emperor's orders were that His Highness the Crown Prince should deal with it personally. Michel then summoned the Marquis of Rink, on whom he hoped to entrust the duty of leading an army to suppress the mutiny in his stead. His wife's father was a retired general, and though he was willing to do the Crown Prince's bidding, he had a condition. For the Marquis to lead the army into battle, he demanded to put an end to the relationship with the Princess of Canaria. So, having gone to war for his daughter's welfare, the old general returned a cold body in a coffin. And now the Crown Prince, responsible for the death of his wife's father, was pondering how much compensation Reinhardt Rink deserved for her parents' valor. In the end, he reasoned that 1,000,000 Alankers in the lands of Helk would suffice. The lands of Helk were the most fertile territory in the empire, vast holdings with endless possibilities, and as the deposed Princess Reinhardt should be grateful for such rich and fertile lands. However, that was not what she desired. Much more, Reinhardt would settle for a life. The life of the Princess of Canaria, for the life of the Princess of Canaria, for the life of her father, who by and large had died because of this person's demand. Therefore, Reinhardt's anger would be dispelled if the Crown Prince would at least chop off her hand. The Crown Princess was not going to just accept this situation. Naturally, the Crown Prince started to refuse and called such an act cruel. Well, Reinhardt will be satisfied with Michael Alanki's head. She would be satisfied if she chopped it off and gave it to the dogs. Shocked by such a bold statement, the Crown Prince forcefully pushed his wife away from him, calling her crazy. The Crown Prince was going to get out of the estate, and in the near future he planned to send from the imperial palace of the official confirmation of the dissolution of the marriage. A sleeping wife he did not consider worthy of a choice in the matter. Reinhardt remembered how for 15 years she had been dying in Helka, the land of opportunity. The girl had begged countless times for a chance to go back in time, to give her just one chance to kill Michel Alankis. Time after time she had prayed and dared. And right now, that chance was at arm's length. The manor was filled with the scream of pain of the prince, who had been stabbed through the calf by his consort's sword. He howled, calling for the cardinal, and Reinhardt drew her sword for the next blow. She decided to finally put her good name aside improperly. Go crazy. Yes, Reinhardt Rinke had traveled back in time into her grieving self of 15 years ago, who would be abandoned by Michel on this day. 2 months later, Reinhardt Delphine Rinke was on trial for attempted murder of the Crown Prince. She was stripped of her title as Crown Princess, and the Rank family forfeited all their rights. Also, The lands, property, and servants of the Marquis of Rinky went into the possession of Michelle Alankes. The condemned girl herself was not upset. She had only recently realized that she had actually gone back 15 years to her downcast self and done what she wished. Wiped Michael's foot to powder. Now the Crown Prince would definitely not be able to practice his favorite dances. So at the trial, instead of sadness on the face of the former Crown Princess, shone a sincere smile. Seeing this, Michelle wanted to demand her father to punish her right now, but the Emperor besieged his son. Because of the situation with Princess Canaria, the trust of the imperial family had already been shaken, and on top of that, the whole country was grieving after the death of Marquis Rank, and this oaf was about to announce a divorce. The Crown Prince should be thankful that he stayed in his place. Reinhardt Rinke was banished to Ruden of the Fielden family, the only land the girl had left. They wanted her to die of cold. Ruden belonged to Reinhardt's mother. It was a desolate and miserable place, very different from the Helk lands she'd gotten in her previous life. And it snowed there 6 months of the year. If that's not Reinhardt's wish to die in the streets, what is? The court, meanwhile, required the criminal to express her gratitude to His Majesty the Emperor until death, and to repent of her crime by being born again, and being born again, and being born again, and dying again, until the dragon soared over the Frame mountain range. In that moment, the girl resolved to survive to the very end in the lands to which she had been banished, and curse Alankes. Reinhardt had to travel to Ruden's lands on her own. She did so in the company of a mercenary hired by Johanna, who was the Crown Princess's maid. Rink had thought that he had somehow easily agreed to go with her despite the long journey, and her suspicions were justified. 2/3 of the way down the road, the man became stubborn, and the former Crown Princess made the decision to let him go on his own. However, the bastard demanded to give up everything she had, especially the sword on the girl's belt. It was the sword of the Rinke family, and it was unacceptable to give it to such a rabble, but the mercenary threatened swift retribution. Reinhardt gritted her teeth, but realized that survival was paramount. Did she have the right to waste her father's hard-earned life? So the girl threw all her money and sword on the snow and told the mercenary to get away. But the man grabbed her by the shoulder. All the savings and the expensive sword were not enough for him. He also wanted the body of the former Crown Princess, but Reinhardt spat in his face and ordered him to disappear. The man became enraged, slapped the girl and started pulling her hair, saying that she was nothing. He was going to take her by force, but before that he was going to torture her, causing physical injuries. But then the mercenary suddenly fell to his knees, grunting pitifully and covering his head with his hands. He was in pain, but why? What did it matter, though? This was Rinke's only chance to eliminate the threat, whatever it was. She brought her sword over the man and thrust it into his body. When the mercenary fell silent, the girl realized she had succeeded. She leaned back tiredly. Her gaze fell on the bloody fruit that had apparently hit the man in the back of the head, causing him to fall. A rustling sound came from the direction of the bushes. Someone was hiding there. Reinhardt held her sword out in front of her and demanded the man hiding there to come out. And when her order was followed, she was surprised. There was a boy standing by the bushes. Out of the bushes came a small, disheveled child, whom Reinhardt had mistaken for a demonic beast a few seconds ago. It bothered her to find a small boy in this wilderness. The worst reason came to mind: the barbarians living on the northern ridge. Her father had once told the girl that they lured people with small children and used them for food during the winter. Reinhardt decided to see if the child would attack her and held her sword out in front of her, threatening to slaughter him if he came any closer. The boy suddenly perked up and rushed towards her, despite the girl's warning shouts. Eventually, Reinhardt swung her sword and the child caught it with his hand by the blade. Blood flowed, but the child didn't even move. He pressed down on the blade, forcibly lowering it, and reached for the girl's hand. Reinhardt already thought that she was going to be eaten, but the boy began to lick the woman's fingers, or rather the wound between them. She had appeared when Rink had aimed her sword at the mercenary in a hurry and killed him. The girl hadn't even noticed, and the child had done it all to heal the wound. Then Reinhardt asked him if he had thrown the fruit that had smashed the man's head. The child shook his head. "Hey, hadn't meant to hurt the girl, and she was genuinely grateful for the help. But the boy didn't react in any way, prompting the thought that he didn't understand speech. So it was best to heal his wound on his arm first. Reinhardt pulled the now blood-stained bandages from under the corpse and cursed. The mercenary was a nuisance even after death. The boy suddenly responded to the curse with a jerky sound. When Reinhardt had killed the mercenary, she had swore too. Does this child really think swearing is a proper name? Rink reached out to ruffle her little savior's hair, but he recoiled and covered himself with his arms as if preparing for a blow. It looked like he had been abused while growing up, and now he was trembling and mumbling a weak no. Poor thing. Reinhardt calmed him down by telling him she wouldn't hit him, thanked him again, and stroked his head after all. Rink bandaged the boy's arm after all, and while he looked at the bandages, she looked at the map, trying to determine the direction Rudin was in. The blood-stained map wasn't very clear, but it was something. When the girl had already picked a direction, the child ran out in front of her with an emphatic, "No!" Rinky suppressed the suspicion in herself that the little savior could still lead her to the barbarians. She decided to believe and listen. When asked which way to go, the boy mumbled no incessantly, and then rushed forward with the same exclamation. Reinhardt followed him. In this way, they walked for about 2 hours and reached a place from which Rudin was perfectly visible. The way was much shorter than if they had followed the map. How did the boy know the way? In any case, it was deep night, so Reinhardt found a suitable cave where they could wait until tomorrow. It was snowing after all, and going down the mountain with nothing to see ahead was a bad idea. In the cave, Rinky built a fire with flint stones. The boy was mesmerized by the fire, and when he was given the stones, he enthusiastically began trying to make sparks. When asked if he was having fun, he again answered no. This was the answer the child gave to all questions, and apparently it was the only one he knew how to pronounce. Reinhardt thought that if she were to take the boy to Rudin, she would have to teach him to talk first. Where did the child come from in those mountains? And what was he doing there? When they reached the fortress, the boy suddenly threw a tantrum and tried to run away. That was how much he disliked the settlements. Reinhardt, even though she didn't know what the child was doing, realized that he didn't have a normal guardian. She had to think of a way to calm the little companion down. Rinka saw a man coming out of the fortress gate with bread. Reinhardt bought a couple of loaves and looked at the boy. He looked at the food with all his eyes and drooled at the mere sight of it. The girl gave him all the 2 loaves and watched the boy eating them with a smile. She explained that if the boy went with her to the fortress, she would give him more bread. He made the right choice and took the girl by the hand. Together, they went to the guardhouse, where Reinhardt introduced herself as Lord Rudena. She was taken to an audience with Sarah, the woman who had long been in charge of Rudena's administration of the field and family. It was the first time in 20 years that a Lord, Reinhardt, had come to this fortress in person. Jeopardy! Helka and Rudin were very different. Lord Helka's castle was 10 times the size of the one in Rudin, but Lord Rudin's castle looks like it's 300 years old. In addition, it snows 6 months of the year, and there's a constant shortage of food. There are only 30 soldiers to defend the vast lands as well. Although there were no wars with other lands, who would invade such a territory? Reinhardt never dreamed that the lands of the Fielden family, her mother's family, would be in such a state. Rinky asked Sarah for the working records of her cousin, the previous lord. However, it turned out that the previous lord was born and raised in the large city of Belkane, so he did his work through a deputy. While he was alive, he had only visited Rudin 3 times. In other words, Sarah didn't want some lord who wasn't local to get involved. But Reinhardt couldn't do that. Michelle, the bastard, was still alive. And his former consort hadn't started her revenge for real yet. Rinky directly stated that, for Sarah, the crown princess, who was probably kicked out of the capital for committing a crime, was probably too troublesome a lord. Sarah evasively remarked that she didn't say that. And since she had, Reinhardt had asked for advice on how to manage these lands. She was going to revitalize Rudin. So the first thing Rinky asked was to take care of the boy that saved her and to tell her if anyone found out about the child's origins. But as soon as the maid tried to take the boy away to wash, he broke free and ran away. The servants rushed in pursuit. Reinhardt laughed, finding the sight amusing. But soon the smile faded from the new Lord Ruden's face. Sarah reported that the local butler recognized the child immediately. He came from the family of Holland, who had fallen because of the barbarian attack. Rinka was clearly shocked. Holona. Could it really be Michael Alanquez's mad dog Will Holona? Will Holona, a man who once appeared and became the hero of Alanki's war. It was known that he was blood related to the barbarians, but Reinhardt knew his true origins. He wasn't just some half-breed barbarian. He was the Emperor's bastard. 17 years ago, while the Emperor was traveling to inspect the northern lands, a lady of the Holland family, a small aristocratic family from the north, got pregnant. The Empress, who found out, had a hand in the child's disappearance. She ordered that the entire Holland clan be burned and that no one be left alive. The Holland clan, falsely accused of treason, was destroyed. Animals, children, even women in labor were no exception. Everyone thought Will Holona was dead. But the year Michel Alanx turned 34, the year it had been 10 years since his divorce from Reinhardt, Michel brought him in. He fought like he'd die if he didn't kill someone. He won on every battlefield. He took over vast territories for his master and earned the nickname Mad Dog due to his incredible loyalty. All these accomplishments became the property of his master, Michel, and the insufferable crown prince, Michel Alanquez, was enthroned as the beloved emperor. Every time the subjects raged and shouted the crown prince's name, it was to Will Holland's credit. Will Holona, that cursed man. Reinhardt had been sure then that she would succeed in the rebellion, exactly until she met Will Holona, who had come to the Helklands, where war was being prepared. It was as if he had been expecting it, and despite Reinhardt possessing Helk's vast army and a river of wealth pouring down, she wasn't sure she could stand up to the man. Vilju Halone. Now, however, a smaller version of this man sat in front of her, apparently. Reinhardt had to wash and dry the child herself, because he would not let anyone but her do it. The servants were dismissed by the Lord as unnecessary. When they left, Rink looked again at the now clean and very cute baby. Holland's villa. Involuntarily, her palms clenched into fists, and she grinned wickedly. But immediately she changed her tone to a friendly one and offered the boy something to eat. He rushed toward the dining hall with a joyous cry of bread. As he ran away, Reinhardt covered her face with her palms. If that child is really Will Holona, if Will Holona is on her side this time, she might actually succeed in getting revenge. The thought made Rinxie's eyes brim with tears of happiness. Had her father really given his daughter a new life to give Will Holland in it? There was a knock at the door, and the girl hurriedly wiped away her tears. A boy looked out from behind the door. He brought her bread and put it in her hands. Reinhardt was still trying to realize that in this life, Will Holona would be at her side, would grow up obeying the deposed crown princess, would become her knight. And this time, there was no way Michelle Alanquez would ever get her hands on this child, to whom Reinhardt Reinke had now given the name Wilhelm. Wilhelm continued to let no one near him but Reinhardt, who was now braiding his hair and marveling that this child was 16 years old. And while she was doing that, she was discussing Thanksgiving with Sarah. Food and goods were distributed to the villagers, for winter was merciless in Ruden. If the Lord didn't distribute food, the villagers would starve to death. Salt, flour, dried beans. Flour was especially expensive, and Reinhardt came up with the idea that they could grow corn on the land and make flour from it and then distribute it. Sarah agreed that the idea could be a success, but there were simply not enough hands in Rudine to do the work. There is a very small population in this land, and if you counted all the young men here, you wouldn't have 100. They may have had a fat turkey in the capital on Thanksgiving, but it's impossible to find one in Ruden. Wild goose at most, which the captain of the garrison hunted, and no one will come to the dinner party. Reinhardt, having heard all this, let Sarah go. She was convinced that Ruden was disgustingly poor land. They were too different from the Helka lands that Renke had gotten in her previous life. There were 3,000 soldiers. Every year they changed hundreds of carpets and blades. And here, for example, here this year, the guards were given 1 sack of dried apples as a reward. Reinhardt couldn't help but swear. Wilhelm immediately turned his head, responding. The girl hurriedly explained that she was not addressing him now. Rinky had intended not to swear in front of the boy, but sometimes it came out of her own mouth with the current situation. She apologized for her behavior, and Wilhelm blushed like a poppy, muttering a quiet no. Reinhardt decided to check his homework, but on the sheet was written cornmeal. Soldiers, turkey. The words from her conversation with Sarah. Rink even laughed, suggesting that the pupil become her secretary. Wilhelm, on the other hand, rested on the girl's lap with his cheeks turning pink. He blushed even more when she patted him on the head again. It was incredibly hard to find a teacher for the boy in Ruden, mostly due to the fact that there are generally few qualified people in these lands, but also because rumors like this started to spread. The new lord went mad after losing her father. As a result, she was banished for attacking the crown prince. So Reinhardt will have to teach Wilhelm herself. Fortunately, he is a smart child, but unfortunately, the girl could not teach him everything on her own. For example, Rudena didn't have a decent swordsmanship teacher, and Rink wasn't a warrior. At the same time, in his previous life, Michelle had quickly found him a teacher. He knew that Wilhelm was the emperor's bastard. Since Reinhardt herself had gotten this information from the crown prince's crony, it was accurate. But how did Michelle know about Wilhelm's origins to take it upon himself to raise him? If even the inconsiderate crown prince realized, then the method should be simple. For example, the ring on the boy's index finger could have belonged to the imperial family. Rinka was pulled out of her musings by Wilhelm, who had finished his task. The girl praised him and habitually reached out to stroke his shaggy head. But the boy suddenly approached her and literally rubbed his forehead against her lips. Then flushed, he ran out of the room, leaving Reinhardt confused. When she realized what had happened, she laughed uproariously. On Thanksgiving morning, Knight Dietrich arrived in Ruden and got down on one knee before the former crown princess. He apologized for learning too late about what had happened, but as soon as he heard that His Highness had left the capital alone, he immediately went to Ruden. Reinhardt could not hold back her tears. She was grateful simply for Dietrich just coming here. But the man shook his head. Still, he could not do otherwise, for he and the girl were on intimate terms. Dietrich had the imprudence to say this in the presence of Wilhelm, who stared gloomily at the stranger with evident hostility. Dietrich Ernst is the childhood friend with whom Reinhardt used to have fun before, and one of the knights her father trusted the most. For a while he had even been Lady Rank's fleeting first love. Now he appeared in Ruden to the deposed crown princess and shared his impressions of this cold and depleted land as if nothing had happened. He even joked that when he passed the last mountain, he had wandered in search of His Highness for fear of finding her covered in snow. Reinhardt, who had briefly sent Wilhelm out of the room, asked him not to call her Your Highness anymore, since she was deprived of that title. Dietrich then decided to address her as Viscountess. The conversation about Ruden's unenviable state continued, and the girl sprang out of her own mouth about the times when she had ruled Helka. Dietrich could not know about that, of course, so Rinky quickly corrected herself, referring to a simple caveat. Then the knight inquired about the Viscountess's plans for the future and regretted that the crown prince had lost her. This surprised Reinhardt. If Dietrich had shown up a year ago, she would have thought he had simply come to inquire about the well-being of an old acquaintance. But Dietrich had arrived 3 or 4 months after the crown princess had been deposed. He came to meet her, who had arrived in Ruden only recently, now that the crown prince has not yet recovered from the shock of being wounded, and all the lords of the empire are closing in on the emperor to please him. That Dietrich came alone to Ruden at a time like this. He was either cast out of the family or he left on his own. Reinhardt put the question squarely. The knight evasively answered that if anything to choose, it was the second. The girl understood it this way. Dietrich had so often said he would leave the family and his older brother had taken to kicking him out. The man, chuckling, agreed. But after a moment, the smile slipped from his lips, and he shared his worries about Michael Alankes. He was trying to take full possession of Rinky's lands. Since the Viscountess had just been declared an outlaw, the Crown Prince began to greedily try to seize all of the Marquis of Rink's property. And not only lands, but also knights, because above all, the main wealth of Rinky was his knights. Dietrich simply could not watch as a man who could not even walk properly ruled the knights. Therefore, the knight blushed with an understatement. He had come to swear allegiance to the Viscountess. Reinhardt laughed that in Ruden Knights in Ruden as a gift for New Year's Eve, give Badian, and she simply had nothing to give him. And what would someone like Dietrich do in these lands? Rudena even has only 30 soldiers. Ernst said with an important look that he would have to become the leader in that case. Reinhardt looked at his back thoughtfully. Is he obligated to rot here, however? There might be one worthy occupation for him. The girl thought of Wilhelm. Dietrich would be a perfect match for his swordsmanship teacher. Rinky voiced this suggestion to Dietrich and took her to show him Wilhelm again. The man joked that he should get more than 1 sack of wheat for the role of teacher, but Reinhardt could only add a wild goose dinner on top. Chuckling, they headed for the dining hall, where they found Wilhelm. The boy clearly didn't like the sight of Reinhardt being led under the arm by Dietrich, and he was scowling and sullen. Reinhardt introduced Wilhelm as the child who had saved her life and invited Dietrich to sit down at the table next to him. But when the man tried to say hello to the boy, he suddenly jumped up and ran out of the room. He glared at the knight with a frown, peering out from behind the door. Reinhardt tried to persuade Wilhelm to return to the table, but he would not listen to her. Dietrich offered to bring the boy, but the girl decided to act in her own way. She began to eat very enthusiastically, saying that the food is very tasty. Rinky thought it was easier to interest a fractious child. Dietrich was not too sure about such a method, but still played along with the Viscountess. Seeing the knight pouring sauce over the food while helping Reinhardt, Wilhelm fled to his room, leaving the adults confused. Dietrich again offered to bring the boy back, but the girl refused. She thought that even if Wilhelm starved for a couple of days, it would clear his mind, and they should continue the meal now. After all, this could be their last dinner party of the year. It had been 3 days since Wilhelm had crammed himself into his room and never left it, not even for meals. Reinhardt didn't understand why the boy was acting this way, and it made her very angry. She even turned to Dietrich, asking what exactly could be threatened at such an age, so that the teenager would finally get the bad ideas of hunger strike out of his head. The knight inquired about the child's age, and when he found out that Wilhelm was 16, he swore hard, for which he was immediately reprimanded by his mistress. Dietrich was simply amazed. Wilhelm was 16, and it wasn't even he was frail and puny, as Reinhardt thought. Knights who look like a languid horse aren't 1 or 2 either. The man simply thought it absurd that a man who does more primitive things than a newly born foal was already 16 years old. When Dietrich himself had turned that age, he had gone to war, following the Marquis of Rank, and had served him. He was his escort, and this one. The Viscountess seemed to think that since Wilhelm was the size of a kitten, he was a small child to be cuddled and coddled. But that was not the case. Dietrich asked to leave it to him and, throwing aside the blanket, grabbed Wilhelm by the ankle. The man yanked his body upward with surprising ease and began to reprimand the teenager. Would this kid, behaving like this, be able to become a man to match the name Reinhardt had given him? The knight threw him off the bed and, ignoring the Viscountess's indignation, continued. He unexpectedly stated that, already at the age of 18, Reinhardt had proposed marriage to him. Embarrassed by such words, the girl tried to silence him, and while they fiddled, Wilhelm sat down on the bed. Dietrich had expected this. He realized from the boy's actions that he could work with his head, but even though Wilhelm looked like a child, Boys of 16 are crafty. The knight pressed the sore point, asking the teenager if he would continue to hide and just watch Reinhardt like this, even at 18. Wilhelm's gaze began to seem angry, and the firm no he had uttered now clearly made sense.